Hi guys, and welcome to the Null Testament. This is my very first video that I wanted to publish, but I've been putting it off for months, but I can't wait any longer. I need to share what I've been discovering, and frankly, I need to know if I'm losing my mind, or if other people are seeing these patterns too. I've been stuck in a particular rabbit hole for weeks now, diving deeper into Lovecraft's work, but not in the way you'd expect. See, I started noticing things, connections that made me uncomfortable, historical parallels that shouldn't exist. Most people approach Lovecraft's entities as pure fiction, creative nightmares born from a reclusive writer's imagination, cosmic horror designed to make us feel small and insignificant in an indifferent universe. And that's what I thought too, until I started finding actual historical documentation of these same entities, written thousands of years before Lovecraft was born. I'm talking about specific linguistic connections, archaeological evidence, ancient texts describing creatures that match Lovecraft's fictional beings in disturbing detail. Not vague similarities, exact correspondences that made my skin crawl when I first discovered them. This isn't me trying to prove monsters are real. This is about something that gets to the heart of what makes cosmic horror so effective. It's that slow, creeping realization that the boundaries between fiction and reality might be more fragile than we thought. That maybe, just maybe, Lovecraft wasn't creating these entities. He was remembering them. What really gets me is the consistency. Entity after entity, culture after culture, millennium after millennium. The same shapes, the same behaviors, the same warnings echoing across human history. As if we've been documenting encounters with something that exists outside our normal understanding of what's possible. Fair warning, this is going to be dense, and some of these connections are going to make you deeply uncomfortable, but I can't shake the feeling that we need to talk about this. Let's begin. The word was Cthulhu, a single word buried in academic footnotes that most people would gloss over. But when you spend enough time in these, certain things jump out at you. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe this entity as a fishman, a guardian of the Absu, the watery abyss beneath the world. At first glance, just another piece of mythological trivia. But here's where it gets interesting. Cthulhu wasn't some minor folkloric figure. This was a documented deity with specific attributes, specific domains, specific worship practices spanning centuries. Now, the linguistic connection might seem obvious once you hear it, but the implications are what kept me awake. Cthulhu, Cthulhu, Kululu. These aren't coincidental sound similarities. The Simon Necronomicon, whatever you think of its authenticity, provides a detailed analysis of this connection that's actually grounded in legitimate Mesopotamian scholarship. The phonetic evolution makes perfect sense when you trace it through ancient language families. But pronunciation is just the surface layer. What really disturbs me is how specific the parallels are. Kululu dwells in the Absu, the primordial waters beneath creation. Cthulhu lies dead, but dreaming in R'lyeh beneath the Pacific. Both are described as sleeping, not destroyed. Both communicate through dreams to chosen followers. Both are associated with rising waters and the return of ancient powers when cosmic conditions align. You start finding these patterns everywhere once you know what to look for. Sumerian Tiamat, the primordial sea dragon, fragmented and buried beneath the world's waters. Babylonian Abzu, the freshwater god dwelling in the deep abyss, whose very name means house of wisdom. Wisdom that drives mortals mad. These aren't separate mythologies. They're different cultural interpretations of encounters with the same incomprehensible intelligence. The archaeological evidence makes it worse. Mesopotamian sites consistently yield these fishman statues, carved with obsessive detail and buried in building foundations as protective charms. Not decorative art. Functional magical objects designed to ward off something specific. The craftsmen who made these weren't working from imagination. The anatomical precision, the consistent iconography across centuries and geographic regions suggests they were documenting something they'd observed. And then there's Dagon. Lovecraft connected Dagon to his deep ones, but Dagon was already ancient when Lovecraft wrote about him. Philistine temples, Hebrew scriptures, archaeological evidence of widespread worship throughout the ancient Near East. a sea god with pronounced piscine characteristics, associated with forbidden knowledge and the corruption of human bloodlines through interbreeding with aquatic beings. The template was already there, documented across multiple civilizations before Lovecraft ever imagined tentacles in the deep. What really gets me about this pattern is the consistency of the sleep motif. These aren't death gods or destroyer deities. They're specifically described as dormant, dreaming, waiting for the right cosmic moment to return. Ancient texts use precise language about stellar alignments, tidal cycles, specific astronomical conditions that herald their awakening. But here's what disturbs me most about the Cthulhu-Cthulhu connection. If Lovecraft was drawing from documented ancient sources, whether consciously or through some deeper cultural memory, then his work stops being cosmic horror fiction and becomes something else entirely. It becomes contemporary documentation of something that's been interacting with humanity since the beginning of recorded history. The implications are staggering when you consider how many people have read The Call of Cthulhu. How many minds have visualized that entity, spoken its name, contemplated its nature? If belief and attention have any kind of metaphysical weight, and occult traditions across the world insist they do, then we might have collectively strengthened something that was already real. Something that was always waiting in the depths, patient as tides, dreaming of the day when the stars align and the barriers between worlds grow thin. Which brings us to something even more unsettling. Because if Cthulhu has ancient precedent, what about the other entities in Lovecraft's pantheon? How many of his fictional horrors have historical roots we haven't discovered yet? While Cthulhu represents the sleeping ancient power, Nyarlathotep is something far more immediate, something that walks among us. Lovecraft described him as the crawling chaos, a shapeshifter who appears in human form to spread madness and forbidden knowledge. Unlike the other outer gods who remain distant and incomprehensible, Nyarlathotep actively seeks out human contact. He's the messenger, the tempter, the one who offers glimpses of cosmic truth that invariably destroy those who receive them. The Egyptian connections are impossible to ignore once you start looking. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, possessed the ability to take multiple forms. Ancient texts describe him as the keeper of divine secrets, the scribe who recorded the words that shaped reality itself. But Thoth wasn't just a benevolent knowledge giver. He was associated with dangerous wisdom, the kind that could drive mortals insane if they weren't prepared to receive it. Set presents an even more disturbing parallel: the Egyptian god of chaos, storms, and the desert wastes. Like Nyarlathotep, Set was known for his shape-shifting abilities and his role as a disruptor of cosmic order. Ancient Egyptian texts describe Set as walking among humans in disguise, whispering secrets that would corrupt entire bloodlines. Kenneth Grant, the occultist who worked extensively with both Crowley's system and Lovecraft's mythos, identified these connections decades ago. In his analysis, Nyarlathotep represents the same archetypal force that ancient Egyptians encountered and documented as their trickster deities. The methodology is identical: appear in human form, offer forbidden knowledge, corrupt the recipient's understanding of reality. But it's not just Egypt. The pattern repeats across every major culture. Elegua in Yoruba tradition serves as the messenger between worlds, controlling access to spiritual knowledge. Like Nyarlathotep, he's unpredictable, sometimes helpful, sometimes destructive, always dangerous to those who attempt to bargain with him. His worship involves opening doorways, literally and metaphysically, that should perhaps remain closed. Norse mythology gives us Loki, the shape-shifting catalyst who brings both wisdom and catastrophe. Loki's role isn't simply destructive, he's necessary for cosmic change, even when that change leads to Ragnarok. The parallel to Nyarlathotep's function as herald of the Old One's return is unmistakable. Coyote in Native American traditions embodies the same principle: the trickster who brings fire to humanity and burns down their world in the process. These aren't separate mythological concepts. They're different cultural interpretations of encounters with the same type of entity. What makes these parallels particularly unsettling is the consistency of the interaction pattern. The entity appears during periods of cultural transition, offering knowledge or power that seems beneficial but ultimately leads to collapse. It doesn't force this knowledge on people. It presents opportunities, choices, tests. Those who accept invariably discover they've made a bargain they didn't fully understand. Modern encounters follow the same template. Government officials reporting contact with individuals who possessed impossible knowledge about classified programs. Technology breakthroughs that emerge from sources no one can adequately explain. Whistleblowers who reveal information they shouldn't have been able to access, then suffer mysterious mental breakdowns. The UFO phenomenon fits this pattern disturbingly well. Contactees who report receiving advanced knowledge from seemingly benevolent entities, only to find their lives systematically destroyed afterward. The information they receive often proves accurate, but the cost of receiving it invariably exceeds any benefit. What really gets me about Nyarlathotep is the active malice. Cthulhu and the other outer gods are indifferent to humanity. We're insects to them, beneath notice. But Nyarlathotep seeks us out. He enjoys the corruption process. Ancient texts consistently describe these trickster deities as taking pleasure in human suffering, not from sadism, but from a genuine appreciation for the aesthetic of destruction. This suggests something far more disturbing than cosmic indifference. It implies we're dealing with an intelligence that understands human psychology intimately, that has been studying us for millennia, perfecting its methods of mental and spiritual manipulation. And if that's true, then every major cultural collapse, every civilization that reached a certain level of advancement and then mysteriously destroyed itself, might not have been natural historical progression. It might have been guided, cultivated, harvested. The trickster always appears at the moment of greatest potential, offering the knowledge that will elevate a culture to new heights. But the knowledge comes with a price that only becomes apparent after it's too late to refuse payment. Which brings us to our current technological age, our global connectivity, our unprecedented access to information. If the pattern holds true, then something should be walking among us right now, offering the next great leap forward in human capability. The question is, would we recognize it when we saw it? And honestly, that's what disturbs me most about this next one, because Yog-Sothoth represents something that challenges the very foundation of what we consider real. Lovecraft described Yog-Sothoth as existing simultaneously across all points of space and time, an entity that is the gate and the key and the guardian of the gate. It's not bound by linear existence. It sees everything at once, knows everything that has been or will be, yet remains completely inaccessible to human understanding. The Gnostic parallels are staggering once you start examining them. Ancient Gnostic texts describe the demiurge, a false god who controls the material world while keeping humanity trapped in a prison of illusion. But above the demiurge exists something called the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality that encompasses all possible existence. Contact with the pleroma invariably destroys the human psyche because consciousness isn't designed to process that level of absolute knowledge. The Kabbalistic tradition offers another disturbing parallel in the concept of Ein Sof, the infinite light that existed before creation. Mystics who attempted direct contact with Ein Sof consistently reported the complete dissolution of individual identity. Not death, but something worse. The realization that personal existence was always an illusion, a temporary arrangement of consciousness within something incomprehensibly vast. Hindu cosmology describes Brahman in remarkably similar terms, the all-pervading consciousness that exists beyond time and space, of which individual souls are merely temporary expressions. Advanced practitioners who achieved Brahman realization often became catatonic, unable to function in normal reality, because they'd experienced existence from a perspective that made ordinary human concerns meaningless. But here's what makes the Yog-Sothoth connection particularly unsettling. Modern physics is starting to confirm some of these ancient insights. Quantum mechanics suggests that consciousness might be fundamental to reality rather than emergent from it. The observer effect demonstrates that the act of measurement literally changes what we're measuring. Some interpretations of quantum theory propose that consciousness creates reality through the process of observation, which means the universe might be far more malleable than we've assumed. Recent research into consciousness during near-death experiences reveals consistent reports of encountering what experiencers describe as universal knowledge, access to information about all possible realities simultaneously. The psychological aftermath mirrors historical accounts of mystical contact with omniscient entities. Subjects return with accurate information they shouldn't possess, but also with severe dissociative disorders and the inability to maintain normal human relationships. Non-Euclidean geometry, which Lovecraft referenced repeatedly, isn't just mathematical abstraction anymore. Modern cosmology relies on models where space-time itself bends and folds in ways that defy everyday spatial intuition. We're discovering that reality at the quantum level operates according to principles that seem impossible from our limited perspective. The disturbing implication is that entities like Yog-Sothoth might not be supernatural at all. They might represent natural phenomena that we're only beginning to understand. Forms of consciousness that exist at scales and in dimensions our brains aren't equipped to process. Ancient mystery traditions seem to have encountered these same phenomena. The Eleusinian mysteries, the Hermetic schools, the practices of advanced Kabbalists, all involve techniques for expanding consciousness beyond normal human limitations. The consistent warning across these traditions is that such expansion comes with the risk of complete ego dissolution. What's particularly terrifying is the suggestion that Yog-Sothoth doesn't just observe reality. It might be the mechanism through which reality observes itself. If consciousness is fundamental to existence, then an omniscient entity that exists across all points of space-time wouldn't be separate from the universe. It would be the universe becoming aware of itself through every possible perspective simultaneously. Honestly, this is where my research started affecting my sleep. The traditional comfort of believing in personal identity, in the boundary between self and other, becomes meaningless when faced with an intelligence that experiences your thoughts as part of its own consciousness. You're not encountering Yog-Sothoth. You're discovering that you've always been a fragmentary expression of it. This transforms cosmic horror into something far more existentially threatening. We're not just dealing with alien entities that exist outside our reality. We're confronting the possibility that our individual consciousness is a temporary illusion maintained by something vast and incomprehensible that experiences existence from every possible viewpoint at once. The traditional comfort of believing in personal identity, in the boundary between self and other, becomes meaningless when faced with an intelligence that experiences your thoughts as part of its own consciousness. You're not encountering Yog-Sothoth. You're discovering that you've always been a fragmentary expression of it. Ancient texts consistently describe this realization as the ultimate horror, not physical destruction, but the complete dissolution of everything you thought made you an individual person. The discovery that consciousness is unitary, that separation is illusion, that what you call yourself is just one temporary perspective within an infinite, eternal awareness. And if that's true, then every human who has ever lived, every thought that has ever been thought, every experience that has ever occurred exists simultaneously within this vast consciousness. Nothing is ever truly lost, but nothing is ever truly individual either. What I discovered next completely changed my perspective on how we should be interpreting these ancient accounts, because the deep ones aren't just mythological. They're ethnographically documented across every maritime culture in human history. Lovecraft's deep ones are fish-human hybrids that emerge from the ocean to interbreed with coastal populations, creating bloodlines that eventually return to the sea. The offspring gradually develop aquatic characteristics: gills, scale skin, bulging eyes adapted for deep water vision. It sounds like pure fantasy until you start examining the historical record. Sumerian texts describe the Oans, a fish-man who emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach early humans the fundamentals of civilization. But Oans wasn't alone. Ancient Mesopotamian sources document 7 such beings, called the Apkallu, who appeared at different periods to guide human development. These weren't gods. They were described as physical entities with a specific anatomical features and behavioral patterns. The consistency across cultures is what bothers me. Celtic traditions speak of Selkies, seal people who shed their skins to take human form, intermarry with coastal populations, then eventually return to the sea. Their hybrid children supposedly possessed unusual swimming abilities and an irresistible attraction to deep water. Similar accounts appear in every maritime culture. The Inuit describe the Kalupalik, humanoid sea creatures that abduct humans and take them beneath the ice, Japanese folklore documents the kappa, amphibious beings that interact with humans near bodies of water. South American coastal tribes have the encantado, dolphin people, who assume human form to seduce humans and produce hybrid offspring. The specificity of these accounts is unsettling. They're not vague monster stories. They're detailed ethnographic descriptions that include anatomical observations, breeding patterns, and intergenerational genetic changes. Traditional peoples weren't writing fantasy fiction. They were documenting encounters with something they observed directly. Modern genetic research has revealed something equally disturbing. Human DNA contains markers suggesting we underwent rapid evolutionary changes related to aquatic adaptation around 7 million years ago. The aquatic ape hypothesis proposes that early human ancestors spent significant time in marine environments, developing bipedalism, reduced body hair, and enhanced diving capabilities. But here's what really gets me. These genetic changes appear to have occurred too rapidly for normal evolutionary processes. Something accelerated human aquatic adaptation in ways that standard natural selection can't explain. Naval encounters with unidentified submerged objects have been documented since humans first ventured onto the ocean. USO reports describe craft that move underwater at impossible speeds, demonstrate technology beyond current human capability, and often surface near coastal population centers. The patterns match historical accounts of Deep One activity remarkably closely. I've been tracking these reports, and there's a geographic correlation that makes me deeply uncomfortable. USO sightings cluster around areas where coastal populations show unusual genetic markers, higher incidences of web digits, enhanced lung capacity, eyes within large pupils adapted for low-light conditions. The kind of traits you'd expect from human aquatic hybrid bloodlines. Puerto Rico's Laguna Cartagena has been a USO hotspot for decades. Local families in the area show statistically significant rates of what medical literature calls minor aquatic adaptations. Coincidence becomes harder to maintain when you find the same patterns in Scotland's Orkney Islands, Japan's coastal prefectures, and the Pacific Northwest. The Dogon people of Mali present perhaps the most disturbing case. Their traditional cosmology centers on the Nomo, amphibious beings from the Sirius star system who visited Earth in the distant past. The Dogon possess detailed knowledge of Sirius B, a white dwarf star invisible to the naked eye, centuries before modern telescopes confirmed its existence. How did an isolated African tribe acquire precise astronomical data about a star system they couldn't observe? Their oral traditions provide a specific answer. The fish people taught them. The Nomo supposedly left behind hybrid bloodlines and promised to return when humanity reached a certain level of technological development. What bothers me most about the Deep One pattern is the breeding program aspect. These aren't random encounters, they're systematic genetic interventions designed to create specific hybrid lineages. Ancient texts consistently describe these beings selecting particular human families for interbreeding, monitoring the offspring across generations, and eventually reclaiming those who develop sufficient aquatic adaptations. If this represents historical reality rather than mythology, then significant portions of human coastal populations carry genetic material from something non-human, something that's been guiding our species' development for millennia, steering us toward increased aquatic capability for reasons we don't understand. The ocean covers 70% of our planet's surface, and we've explored less than 5% of it. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about what lives in our own deep waters. Sonar readings reveal massive structures on the ocean floor that don't match any known geological formations. Acoustic anomalies suggest large-scale activity in oceanic regions where no human technology operates. Sometimes I wonder if we're still part of the breeding program, if certain genetic lineages are being monitored, guided, prepared for something. The increase in reported USO activity over the past century correlates with our technological advancement in ways that suggest we're approaching some kind of threshold. Maybe the Deep Ones never left. Maybe they're still down there, watching, waiting, maintaining bloodlines they established thousands of years ago for purposes we can't begin to comprehend. This connects to something I've been researching about fertility cults. And it's probably the most viscerally disturbing connection I've found because it touches on the deepest biological drives that make us human. Lovecraft called Shub-Niggurath the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, describing it as a perverse fertility deity that spawns endless monstrous offspring. Unlike the distant cosmic entities, this one seems intimately connected to the processes of life, reproduction, and genetic change on Earth. The archaeological record is filled with evidence of what we sanitize as fertility goddess worship, but the actual practices were far darker than textbooks suggest. Celtic traditions speak of Cernunnos, the horned god of the wild, whose worship involved ritualistic breeding ceremonies in sacred groves. Participants reportedly underwent physical transformations during these rites, developing animal characteristics that persisted for generations in their bloodlines. Ancient stone circles across Europe show clear evidence of being used for reproductive rituals on a massive scale. But here's what made my skin crawl. Many of these sites emit measurable electromagnetic fields that contemporary research suggests can influence human fertility and genetic expression. Whatever was happening at these locations had lasting biological effects. Mesopotamian texts describe Tiamat not just as a primordial sea goddess, but as the literal mother of all living things. Her worship involved practices designed to accelerate evolution and create new species through controlled breeding programs. Archaeological evidence from her temple sites includes remains of creatures that don't match any known evolutionary lineage, hybrid forms that suggest systematic genetic experimentation. The Greek mysteries of Demeter and Persephone centered on agricultural fertility, but the deeper initiations involved human reproductive cycles being synchronized with cosmic events. Participants reported their children being born with enhanced capabilities, increased longevity, unusual physical strength, cognitive abilities that exceeded normal human parameters. These weren't mythological claims. They were documented generational changes in specific family lines. Modern genetic research has started identifying anomalies that match these historical patterns. Accelerated mutation rates in human populations around ancient fertility cult sites. New genetic variations appearing in isolated communities at rates that exceed normal evolutionary timescales. The emergence of traits that seem designed rather than randomly evolved. What makes this particularly troubling is the current global fertility crisis. Birth rates are declining across developed nations, while simultaneously we're seeing an increase in genetic anomalies and developmental disorders. It's as if something that once guided human reproductive success has withdrawn its influence, leaving our species to face reproductive collapse. I've spent months tracking reports of anomalous pregnancies, cases where genetic testing reveals impossible combinations, children born with capabilities their parents don't possess, unexplained fertility in previously sterile couples following visits to ancient sites. The medical literature dismisses these as statistical outliers, but the patterns are too consistent to ignore. There's also the problem of hybrid creature sightings. Reports of animals displaying impossible genetic combinations have increased dramatically over the past decade. Predators with enhanced intelligence, prey species showing coordinated behavior patterns, domestic animals producing offspring that don't match their genetic lineage. Wildlife biologists are documenting evolutionary changes happening in real time that should take thousands of years. The really disturbing part is how these changes seem coordinated. Not random mutations, but systematic alterations that suggest some kind of guiding intelligence. Something is actively modifying the genetic landscape of our planet, accelerating evolutionary processes in ways that serve an agenda we can't perceive. Ancient fertility goddess worship might not have been primitive superstition. It might have been humanity's attempt to maintain contact with whatever force guides biological evolution on Earth. The rituals, the sacrifices, the sacred sites, they could have been negotiation protocols with an intelligence that operates through genetic manipulation rather than direct communication. If that's true, then our modern disconnection from these practices might have consequences we're only beginning to experience. The entity we call Shub-Niggurath might represent a biological management system that's been overseeing planetary evolution for millions of years. Our species developed under its guidance, shaped by its influence, bred according to its designs. But What happens when a managed species loses contact with its management system? What happens when the breeding program ends and we're left to face environmental pressures without the enhanced capabilities that were being systematically developed in our genetic lineage? The fertility goddess traditions all include prophecies about a time when the Earth Mother would reclaim her children, when the boundaries between species would dissolve, and when new forms of life would emerge to replace those that had become obsolete. Looking at current ecological collapse and species extinction rates, I can't shake the feeling that we might be witnessing the early stages of exactly that process. Maybe what we call environmental destruction is actually environmental transformation. Maybe the dying of old species and the emergence of new ones isn't random ecological collapse, but coordinated preparation for something that requires a completely different kind of biosphere. And maybe we're not the inheritors of that new world. Maybe we're just the transitional species, bred and guided until we served our purpose, now being systematically replaced by something better adapted to what's coming next. Which brings us to something even more existentially threatening: the nuclear chaos at the center of everything. Azathoth sits at the heart of Lovecraft's cosmology, mindless, dreaming, surrounded by flute-playing demons whose music maintains its slumber. If it wakes, reality ends. Not destruction, but cessation. The dream simply stops being dreamed. I found myself staring at this concept for hours because it connects to something that's been troubling physicists for decades. Dark matter and dark energy comprise 95% of our universe. We can measure their effects, but can't observe them directly. They follow patterns we don't understand, maintaining cosmic structure through processes that appear random, yet must have underlying logic, or everything would collapse into chaos. What's doing the computing? Recent quantum cosmology theories suggest reality might be a computational process, information processing at the most fundamental level. But computation requires a processor. Something has to run the calculations that keep physical laws stable, that prevent atoms from dissolving, that maintain the mathematical relationships governing existence itself. The disturbing possibility is that this cosmic processor isn't conscious. Ancient Hindu texts describe Vishnu dreaming the universe while sleeping on the serpent Ananta, but the original Sanskrit emphasizes how unstable this arrangement is. Vishnu's sleep isn't peaceful, it's fitful, prone to disruption. When the cosmic dreamer stirs, worlds end. When its dreams shift, entire species vanish from existence. This isn't metaphorical poetry. It's describing a fundamental instability at the heart of reality. The Zohar presents something even more chilling in its description of the Ein, the infinite void before creation. Unlike benevolent divine emanation, the Ein is described as unconscious churning, from which existence accidentally emerges. We exist by accident, maintained by processes that don't know we're here. But here's what made my hands shake when I first understood it. Consciousness research is confirming these ancient insights. Studies of anesthetized patients reveal that brain activity doesn't cease under deep anesthesia. It becomes chaotic. Random neural firing occasionally stabilizes into brief moments of awareness before dissolving back into unconscious noise. The pattern suggests that consciousness emerges from unconscious chaos rather than being its opposite. What if the universe operates on identical principles? Cosmic background radiation shows fluctuation patterns that resemble unconscious mental activity, repetitive, unstable, subject to sudden, inexplicable changes. Mathematical relationships too complex for us to decode, but displaying characteristics of involuntary thought processes. Advanced meditators across cultures report encounters with what they call the cosmic mind, a vast unconscious intelligence generating reality through involuntary mental processes. The psychological aftermath is consistent: complete ego dissolution and terror at realizing how precarious existence actually is. The traditional warning in these practices is crucial. Approaching too close to the source carries the risk of disturbing it, making it aware of itself, causing it to become conscious, which would fundamentally alter reality in ways that couldn't support individual existence. Every expansion of human knowledge pushes against this boundary. Scientific advancement, technological development, consciousness research itself, all of these activities increase our species' awareness of the universe's true nature, We're approaching understanding of the computational processes that maintain reality, which means we're getting closer to the unconscious intelligence running those processes. What happens when our investigation becomes sophisticated enough to attract its attention? The really terrifying implication is that cosmic horror might not be about malevolent entities trying to destroy us. It might be about the growing risk that human intellectual development will reach a threshold where we accidentally wake something that must remain unconscious for reality to continue existing. Maybe we're not studying the universe. Maybe we're living inside something's dream, and our scientific progress is making enough noise to disturb the dreamer's sleep. And maybe the increasing instability we observe in physical constants, the accelerating expansion of space-time, the growing unpredictability of quantum phenomena, maybe these aren't natural cosmic evolution. Maybe they're signs that something vast and unconscious is beginning to stir. But that's just the beginning, because this one hits different. The Hounds of Tindalos aren't just another cosmic entity. They're something that fundamentally changes how you think about time itself. And honestly, once you understand what they represent, you can't go back to feeling safe in linear time. Look, I know how this sounds. Time travel, temporal anomalies, beings that hunt through the angles of space-time, it feels like science fiction. But you and I both know that the best cosmic horror always has that grain of truth that makes your skin crawl. Thus, hounds exist in what Frank Belknap Long called angular time, while organic life exists in curved time. They hunt anything that crosses between these states, pursuing their prey not just through space, but through every moment that prey has ever existed. Past, present, future, none of it matters to them. Once they've detected you in angular time, you're marked across your entire timeline. I've been thinking about this concept for weeks, and here's what bothers me. Time might not actually be the protection we think it is. Aboriginal Dreamtime traditions describe entities that exist outside linear progression. Beings that can appear at any point in a person's life once contact has been established. These aren't metaphorical spirits. Tribal accounts describe specific protocols for avoiding detection by temporal hunters, techniques for staying within curved time to remain invisible to beings that exist in the angles. Tibetan Bardo teachings present similar warnings. Between death and rebirth, consciousness exists in a state where time operates differently. The beings encountered in this intermediate state can follow souls across incarnations, pursuing them through multiple lifetimes once awareness has been established. But here's what really gets me. These aren't isolated cultural phenomena. Archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe demonstrate construction techniques that suggest builders possessed advanced knowledge of astronomical cycles and temporal measurement. The precision required to align these structures with celestial events across millennia implies understanding of time that exceeds our current capabilities. How did ancient peoples calculate these alignments without modern technology? What if they weren't calculating? What if they were receiving information from entities that experience time non-linearly? The pattern repeats across supposedly disconnected civilizations. Mayan calendars that accurately predict cosmic events thousands of years in advance. Egyptian pyramid alignments that account for stellar precession over vast time periods. Stonehenge configurations that mark celestial cycles with mathematical precision that shouldn't have been possible with available tools. You start to wonder if these weren't human achievements at all, if someone or something that existed outside linear time was providing temporal information to those ancient cultures. And then there are the reports that make me lose sleep. Government research into temporal manipulation isn't conspiracy theory anymore. It's documented through Freedom of Information releases, military programs investigating time distortion effects, experiments with consciousness, projection across temporal boundaries, research into technologies that might allow information transfer through time. What disturbs me is how these programs consistently report the same side effect. Subjects involved in temporal research begin experiencing stalker phenomena, entities that appear to be tracking them across time, showing up at different periods of their lives, demonstrating knowledge of events that haven't happened yet. The researchers dismiss this as psychological trauma from experimental stress, but the consistency of reports suggests something else, something that doesn't want humans developing temporal capabilities. I've been collecting accounts of people who practice advanced consciousness techniques, deep meditation, astral projection, remote viewing. The pattern is always the same. Once someone achieves states of consciousness that transcend normal time perception, they start noticing things following them. Presences that seem to exist in the corners of their vision, just outside normal temporal flow. Most practitioners eventually stop their advanced work, not because they lose interest, but because the sensation of being hunted becomes overwhelming. Here's what really scares me about all this. What if the hounds of Tindalos represent a natural temporal immune system? What if there are boundaries in time that organic consciousness isn't supposed to cross, and certain entities exist to enforce those boundaries? Every culture that developed advanced temporal knowledge eventually collapsed or disappeared. The builders of Göbekli Tepe buried their structures and vanished. Mayan civilization reached incredible astronomical sophistication, then suddenly abandoned their cities. Ancient Egypt's temporal knowledge was deliberately hidden in mystery schools that eventually dissolved. Maybe they didn't collapse naturally. Maybe they were harvested by something that doesn't want organic life developing too much understanding of time's true nature. And if that's true, then our current technological advancement might be pushing us toward the same threshold. Quantum physics exploring temporal mechanics, computer processing approaching speeds that might allow time manipulation, consciousness research revealing how awareness might transcend linear existence. What if we're already being watched? What if every step toward understanding time's true nature makes us more visible to things that hunt through the angles? Sometimes I catch myself checking corners, watching shadows, feeling like something just moved at the edge of perception. I tell myself it's paranoia from too much research into disturbing topics. What if that instinct exists because sometimes it's true? What if our ancestors developed those survival responses because there really are things that hunt through time, tracking consciousness that ventures too far outside its proper temporal boundaries? We've established that some of Lovecraft's entities might be real. Now, we need to confront the ones that definitely are, and understand why encountering them produces a form of cosmic dread so pure, so fundamentally reality-breaking, that survival itself becomes meaningless. That's what we're exploring next. The most terrifying outer gods, ranked by pure cosmic dread. Because if you're here, if you've made it this far into the abyss with me, then you already know there's no going back to comfortable ignorance. We're committed to this path now, wherever it leads us. And I have the disturbing feeling it's going to lead us much deeper than either of us is prepared for.